Hello, so today I have had a request for masks, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to do two basic styles with lots of variations. One style we've already covered in class, but I've made a few tweaks to it, so hopefully you'll find the improved version better. Lots of people have different ideas about masks, whether we should or shouldn't have them. If there comes a point when we're told we have to wear them, then let's be ready. Again, material wise, washed cotton is by far and away the best. You want a really close weave cotton. You can, if you want, use an iron-on backing, which gives you an extra layer, or if you feel that your cotton is just a wee bit on the fine side, just double it up. So use 2 layers for your main front and 2 layers for your back if you like. Then that obviously will make it thicker. Sometimes people talk about filters. Again, there's lots of people have different ideas on the filters. On the first one, I've left the option of putting filters in if you wish. So first one is going to be this one, which is just a nice, simple, easy mask. When you put it on, it opens out and there's the gap in the bottom. If you do eventually want to put a filter in there, it's there with elastic, round elastic. The next one is exactly the same style. I've used straight elastic rather than the rounded, and in the inside, when you pull it open over your nose, I've got a bit more of an interest in it. So that's that one. And then the other ones we've got are over here. So this one has got the wire in the top, round elastic, and is adjustable. The next one is exactly the same. Again, it's adjustable. This one I've put in the packaging band from the rye bread packet. I'll show you that later. And straight elastic, quite a fun one. Make sure if you've got a pattern that you obviously keep it the right way up, kind of your tractors upside down or your diggers. And then this one again with the wire in the top and your elastic, round elastic to hold it on. The first one is by far and away the easiest one to make, so that's what we're going to start with. So for this mask, it is a nice piece of motley cotton. It's closely woven, which is exactly what you want. If I lay it down here, this is the right side uppermost. I'm showing you it is 16 inches by 8. And you notice that I've drawn lines, marker lines, every 2 inches, plus my ½ inch at the end and ½ an inch at the beginning. When you do it, you don't need to put your lines all the way across, just mark the ends. But do be careful if you've got a pattern, you don't want to go in sideways. So when this is finished, this will be one ear and that will be the other. So I'm now at my ironing board with my piece of fabric. The very first thing I'm going to do is tuck under on that line the first and crease. The next line I'm going to take a hold of it and bring it up to the next line, like that. And I can now give that a crease. When you're using marker pens, you've got to ensure that you get your ironing done correctly first time, otherwise you have to remark it. So that's the first one. The next one I'm going to do is bring it down to meet the first one, like so. Get it straight. I guess there might be a value in taking your pencil, your marker pen all the way across. You can see you've got it just right. So that is going to be the front of our mask. And this is going to be the top. So I'm just going to crease that way. So let's go back to where we were. Put a pin in there, I think. the same this side. So there we are, inverted pleat basically. So that's our seam allowance at this side. Then my first pleat, that's the fold for the top. And now I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to do exactly the same. So the first one was to press up your seam allowance. The next was to take that first line to the next line and press. And then we're going to take the last line that we've got left down to there and press and pin. Oops. Hopefully you can see it taking shape now. So the finished article is going to look like that. Now take it and put right sides to right side. Open your seam allowance out, but you've still obviously got that crease in there. And what we're actually going to do next is to stitch our sides, but before we actually stitch the sides down, we need to put our elastic in. Now I've pinned my elastic in, so if I do that you can see that's the top half of the mask. You notice I've got the elastic coming into the mask because once you stitch that it will then flick out the way, remember. It's a 7-inch piece of elastic. I'm using the round elastic, but clearly you can use a flat elastic if you wish. The flat is easier to sew in. Because it's the round one, I'm going to stitch in first and then I'm going to put the two right sides together. So you can see here I've drawn my fold line for the seam at the bottom and there's the middle at the top. So you can see I've just come in a little way from either end. So these would get stitched. It would also catch the pleat in and I'd stitch this side as well. You may or may not be able to see there, I've stitched from here and actually I've gone all the way to the end just to make life easier. Now it's stitched, so I've gone from the top, the folded edge, and you can probably see my bits of elastic sticking out there. Can't really see the stitching, but the stitching comes down and you turn around the corner and I've come as far as that pin there. And then I've done exactly the same this side. The other thing I've done is, hopefully you can see, missed a little bit of that, is trimmed my corners. Trimmed any threads, taken out any extra bits, and then turn it out. Now the reason I've left the bottom bit open is because you might at some point want to put a filter in there. Now that's entirely up to you whether you put a filter in or not, but it gives you the option. If I can get in here. So make sure you poke your corners out properly, and the same on the other side. Too many layers of fabric in here. There we go. And then in fact a wee bit of the, remember I left that wee bit on. Let's get rid of that. And that side. So as I say, either you can leave that bottom open, and if at some stage you do want to put a filter in, you can. Failing that, when it goes on, you've got a nice loose bit at the front. I guess if you wanted, you could do a top stitch along and up, just leaving that opening, or in fact if you decide you don't want the opening, then stitch across. I think one of the other reasons I like having something different on the front is because if you take the mask off and have to put the same mask back on, which I don't think is recommended, but if you ended up having to do that, you want to be absolutely sure you've got it the right way around. On this one, it's really hard to tell which is the right and the wrong side, whereas obviously this one is different back and front. And you might decide you don't like the zebras and you just want the pink dots, and that's fine. So on this one here, I just want to give you the dimensions because you make it up in exactly the same way as we did the first one. Now we've got that upside down, it's that way around. The zebras are all upside down all over the place, so there we are. So measurement wise, still 8 inches wide, which is the first thing. And then you can see I've got the next one cut out. So the first bit here I've got cut at 2.5 inches deep. The following one, which is going to be the sort of insert bit, is cut at 5 inches. And the next piece is 10.5 inches long by your 8 inches wide. So you join them all together, as you would imagine, right side to right side, and that one right side to right side, stitch, and then you've got one long piece of fabric which you can then take and fold in exactly the same way as we did this one, and have it looking like that. So we have our strips of fabric put together. I've given the seams a really good press, 1/2 inch seam allowances. I'm then going to take this, so this is actually slight deviation from the other pattern, for those that are eagle-eyed. I don't know if you noticed that this is a slightly shorter measurement than that one, and that's because we took our seam allowance out of our 2-inch strip as opposed to adding it on. This one I've added it on, so when I bring this up, I'll have my 1/2 inch, and this bit will be, oops, that will be my 1/2 inch turn up, and then this will be 2 inches. So both sides will be even, which personally I think looks slightly nicer. So you can see what I've done. First fold up, second fold down, go 2 inches up, and that's going to be the top of the mask. And then if we turn it over, you'll do exactly the same on the other side, just as we did with the first one. So this mask I think is my favourite one, and the reason I like it is because it's got wire at the top, so you can mould that around your nose. It means that if you're wearing glasses, you don't have any warm air escaping up and steaming up your glasses. So I like the fact that you've got this nose piece. It fits round nicely, it's a nice shape and it hugs the face. I've used a contrasting colour for a lining, and the reason for that is I don't want to inadvertently put it on the wrong way round. If you've had it on and you take it off for some reason, you certainly want to put it on the correct way round, so there's no error there. So this is a pattern. I've laid it on my 1-inch squares, so hopefully you'll be able to follow that. This is an adult size. Obviously for a child size you need to do it smaller, but at the moment I think it's just adults that may need to wear masks. So the main fabric and the lining have been cut, and you can see on my 2 pieces of lining fabric I've stitched the long curved seam, and I've done exactly the same on my main fabric. The other thing that hopefully you can see is that I've notched it, so I've taken little wedges out. It just means it will lie a bit flatter. So I would give that a really good press now, and the same with this one. The other thing that I've got here is a piece of fabric which was 1 inch wide, 5 inches long, and I folded in about 1/4 inch on one edge, and I've folded in the 2 ends. This is going to be the bit that takes the wire. Now, I've deliberately used a white thread on here so you can see the stitching, and used a very contrasting colour on here. You're not going to see this when it's all done, so you can use any little bit of fabric you like, but you won't see it as I say, I just use it as a contrast. What I would say about this is don't use a tape because your wire will go through it. You are much better off using a piece of fabric. And if you wanted to have a double thickness of lining, so you would end up then with 3 thicknesses of fabric, then just put 2 layers of lining together and treat it as one. So now I'm just going to be working with my lining piece and my little edge piece. So I've got one edge which is raw and the other edge I've turned in. I'm going to, on the wrong side of my mask, find the middle of this and put the seam of the mask to one side and the middle of this on the seam with my raw edge, both of them together basically. So if we do that, and I'm now pinning on that folded edge, but keeping my raw edges together. And go the same this way. Now there would be an argument for saying it would be slightly easier if this little 1-inch strip of fabric was cut in the cross, and you're probably right, but to be honest, it's such a small area that you'll be able to work it round. So you can see I've kept the raw edge of this piece and the raw edge of your mask at the top together, and I'm going to stitch basically where I've put the pins along here all the way along to this end and stop. Right, so that's us stitched in. There's the wrong side of it, and as I say, this is all going to be hidden, so you can use any fabric you like, but not tape. Make sure it's a woven fabric, and you can see the stitching on the outside. Now, again, when you're using it and you're stitching yours, make sure it's a colour that matches in rather than one that stands out so everyone can see. Next thing we're going to do is take our main fabric, and we're going to put the right side to right side. And remember, we tucked the seam allowance on the lining one way, it's going that way, so my main fabric I'm going to tuck it the other way, just so I don't have quite as much bulk. And we shall find a pin and put it in there. And I am going to pin from here all the way up and round to there, and I'm going to do exactly the same along the bottom edge. So I will be leaving the sides open. Stitch top and bottom. You would use the colour that matches your fabric, of course. You see on the top edge here it's caught this 1-inch strip that we put in, and the other thing I've done is I've notched the top edges. On the curves you want to notch it, and down here where you've got a seam, where you can see that, I've notched it as well. At least I've gone up into towards the stitching, but definitely not through it. Now pull it all through, and we will give that a really good press. All pressed, and the next thing we're going to do is find a piece of wire to put in the top nose piece. It just, I think, makes it a bit closer fitting if you've got the wire. So the wire I've used is a florist wire. The strip that we used in the top of the mask was, if you remember, we cut it 5 inches, but then we had the turnings. So the wire I've cut 4.5, and you notice I've turned the edges in. So you just take your, here's another piece, take the clippers and bend it round and then squish it together. So this is the one I want to use. Go back to my mask, and now we are going to keep it close to the lining side, and you'll find that it'll just push up and through. Okay, bend it a little bit to help it go round. I can feel both ends and they are just about the right place. So I need to just stitch that end because I can't have that coming out, and stitch this end. So where the pins are, just stitch up and down, and that keeps the wire in place. But you can see now that's quite flexible. You can push it into any shape you like. So I have the ends stitched in, and the other little bit of stitching I did, which maybe if I turn it that way you can see, the black row of stitching here. I stitched as close to the edge as I could, bearing in mind that you've got that wire in there, so obviously you don't want to stitch over the wire. Just it holds it in place a bit better, and then you can shape it into any nose shape you wish. If you don't have the florist wire, which is what I used here, maybe some garden wire, just make sure that you don't have any sharp edges on the end, would work. The other thing you could use is the takeaway aluminium trays. If you cut a strip and then fold it in so you don't have any raw edges, again that could work. And the other one I've got here is the tie from rye bread, I think it was. Again, I would just turn the edges in. I did have one that I did that with. Here we are. So I've just turned the edges in using just using the pliers, basically. Get hold of the end and twist it in. Oh, I'm not very well. Not like that. So let's try again. Hold the end and then twist it in and squeeze it together. That looks better. Okay, and do the same the other side. We don't want any sharp edges. That would work. It's quite stiff, but it would still work. And actually, at the end of the day, if you don't have any wire of any sort, just make it without. Something is better than nothing, I think. You know, you're better wearing a mask than not wearing a mask. So that's the nose piece done. Next thing we need to do is our elastic ends. So this is the end that you have at the minute. We just tuck that in like so. Oops. Make sure it's even and straight. And then if you want to use knicker elastic, that would go, I start at the top, that's going to go in at the top there. And then make sure you've got no twists in it. Bring it down. And for this pattern, I actually like the elastic to be about an inch from the bottom edge. That's just the way I like it. It feels better on me. I would put it in place and try it. If you like it there, stitch it there. If you don't, move it back down to kind of the more normal place. So you can use this elastic, obviously do the same both sides. The length of this will be 7.5 inches. Yep, 7.5 inches, and stitch them in. You can also use the rounded elastic, which is maybe slightly softer on the ears. That works. If you don't have any elastic, if you've got an old t-shirt, you can cut strips from the t-shirt, which it'll be stretchy and it'll be nice and soft, and that works just as well. So that goes in exactly the same way. As I say, I prefer it to be about there and at the top on this side. Same both sides. If, however, you decide, what's this one here? If you decide that you want to make it slightly adjustable because you're doing it for someone else, you can do. So again, I've used the same elastic, the round elastic. Before I've stitched it in, I've made a little loop in the end, and the loop in the end is quite straightforward to do. Let me show you that. So my elastic is 10 inches long. I've taken one end and folded it over, and then the next thing I'm going to do is put my needle and thread through, which I've done here, and then you wrap the thread around your fingers and through the loop, around your fingers and through the loop, and just do this a few times till it's nice and secure. Once you feel it's secure, then secure your thread by going up through the thread. You don't need to go through the elastic this time, just go through the thread and then into that loop that you've left, and do that a couple of times. And then cut your excess off. So we're now going to take this and find our mask again and tuck the ends of our mask in as we did before. You're going to take this end and poke it quite a long way in. The reason you're doing it quite a long way in is when you stitch, you don't want your foot to get caught on that loop that you've just made. So we're now going to make a channel. So we're going to stitch where I've put the pin in there, and it means that you can pull this out, and when we want to we can pull it back in the way. You've got to sew this really, really tight onto your cord. It's the friction of actually pulling through the channel that stops the cord coming out completely. So you stitch in there, and then once you've done that, take the other end, and remember on this I said I like to come up a little bit from the bottom edge, so I'm going to come to there. I'll take that to the machine and I'll zigzag across there, and then close that over and stitch just that bit, leaving this bit here open. The reason I want to leave that bit open, as you can see on here, so it's only a little bit, but it's just enough to get my fingers in to do my adjustment. She says it does work. There we go. Clearly it needs to be longer than that, so you would put the mask on and pull it until you're happy with it, and it should be quite, you have to pull it to get it out. Obviously do that both sides, and then that would be that mask finished.